Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Distinguished Scientist Fellow Ceremony and the lecture featuring Dr. Mary Boucher from Brookhaven National Laboratory. I'm Linda Horton. I'm the Associate Deputy Director for Science Programs in the Department of Energy's Office of Science. And today I am pleased to welcome many distinguished guests. Energy of Science, Department of Energy Office of Science Leadership, including Gina, Nika, and many others from other offices. DOE National Laboratory Directors, including Dr. Joanne Hewitt, Director of the National Laboratory, who is joining us in person today. Both in the room and online, we have the nomination teams, the people that reviewed all the nominations, and colleagues of Mary's, as well as representatives from the broad scientific community. Today, we are celebrating Dr. Boucher's accomplishments in particle physics and her selection as a 2024 Office of Science Distinguished Scientist Fellow. Before we hear from Dr. Boucher, let's hear from Dr. Jerry Richmond, the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation at the Department of Energy, and she has provided pre-recorded remarks.
Hello, I'm Jerry Richmond, the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation at the Department of Energy. I wish I could be there in person today, but at least being able to speak at events like this in any format is a true honor and joy. It is my pleasure to join you today and congratulate Dr. Mary Boucher from Brookhaven National Laboratory for her selection as a 2024 DOE Office of Science Distinguished Scientist Fellow. As you will hear from others shortly, Dr. Boucher represents the finest of DOE with over 26 years of combined scientific leadership and service at 2 DOE national laboratories, Brookhaven National Laboratory and Fermilab, and also in the international particle physics community. Dr. Boucher, like all the Distinguished Scientist Fellows, are why Secretary Granholm calls DOE America's Solutions Department. They're advancing diverse fields in discovery science, like particle physics, strengthening American leadership and competitiveness in science and technology, while also mentoring the next generation of students. Fundamental, groundbreaking science is baked into our success as a nation, sparking curiosity and spurring innovation. I've personally had the pleasure to speak at more than 4 of these guest lectures, spanning multiple cohorts, and I always get very excited when I hear about the phenomenal science that you all do. So I look forward to hearing from Dr. Boucher today, so please join me in a short round of applause for Dr. Boucher as I hand things over to Dr. Harriet Kung. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary Richmond. And let me extend my apologies of Harriet Kung, who was not able to be here today. Transitions are very complex things, and her time is consumed these days with those activities. Now I would like to welcome Dr. Joanne Hewitt, Director of Brookhaven National Laboratory, to the podium. Joanne?
Good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Horton just mentioned, I'm Joanne Hewitt. I'm a theoretical particle physicist. My very first publication was on neutrino physics. I'm also director of Brookhaven National Lab. I'm honored to congratulate all 4 distinguished scientist fellows that have won this award in 2024. And today we're here to honor Mary Boucher, the physicist from Brookhaven. Thank you to the Department of Energy Office of Science for running this very important program. Senior scientists who have spent their careers at the national labs are so important to the lab, to science, and to the entire science ecosystem in the United States. They're experts in their fields with major accomplishments. they've accumulated institutional knowledge, they know how to get things done, and they're laying the groundwork for future scientists who will make the discoveries that today we dream about. Each of DOE's national laboratories is unique and world-leading. At Brookhaven, we accelerate pathways to scientific discovery and technological innovation that transform the world. One of our 4 major initiatives is understanding the building blocks of the universe. Much of that work focuses on nuclear physics and the electron ion collider that we're building with DOE, Jefferson Lab, and many other partners around the world. Brookhaven also has a major role in particle physics. We are the US lead for the ATLAS detector at the Large Hadron Collider, and we have the largest neutrino program outside of Birmingham. Mary's work builds on 3 of Brookhaven's 7 Nobel Prizes: the discovery of the cosmic neutrino, what the citation says, we just looked it up, the muon neutrino, and charge parity violation. I met Mary when she was a project scientist for the long baseline neutrino experiment a couple of decades ago. The project later transitioned to the Deep Underground Neutrino Experiment, or DUNE, which is now a 1,400 member collaboration representing 36 countries, of which Mary was elected co-spokesperson in 2023. Mary will tell you more about that soon. And I won't spoil anything, but there's many benefits to measuring the properties of neutrinos. We will learn information about the matter-antimatter asymmetry in the universe and how the universe works the way that it does. And there's broader benefits in that just by building these large-scale experiments, we drive forward technologies for the future. This has been proven over and over again. Explorations in physics inspire people of all ages. Mary recognizes this and is helping prepare the next generation to continue our work into the future. Mary has mentored many high school students through Brookhaven's Office of Educational Programs and undergraduates through DOE's Workforce Development for Teachers and Scientists program. She is also helping build the talent pool for future scientists and engineers through her work with the African School of Physics. She went on to become, in 1985, Mary will tell you all about this, so I don't think, I'm just gonna skip this. You're gonna tell her how what got you into physics. It's a really fascinating story. I have to say, very special story. I found it inspiring. So Mary, over the years, you have absolutely earned the title of Distinguished Scientist. My congratulations to you come with 2 requests. First, please keep being you. Please keep caring about what you do and keep doing what you're doing. You're very special. And thank you all for that you contribute to Brookhaven, to DOE, to the Office of Science, the International Particle Physics community, and most importantly, to the next generation of scientists who will come after us.
Thank you, John. We really appreciate that you were. It's a special event to have the lab director here. Before we present Dr. Bichet with her award, I'd like to say a few words about her accomplishments and about the Distinguished Scientist Fellows Program. These awards honor the extraordinary scientific achievements and professional service records of senior scientists at the DOE National Laboratories. Fellows were nominated by their colleagues, endorsed by their lab directors, and chosen through a very rigorous review process. They exemplify excellence in the field and represent the best of the DOE National Laboratories in science, mentorship, and service. Fellows receive $1 million in direct funding to support initiatives that sustain the excellence in Office of Science Research through collaboration between academic institutions and national laboratories. Since its inception in 2019, the Office of Science has recognized 17 distinguished scientist fellows, including 4 for 2024. The Office of Science is hosting a 4-part lecture series featuring each of the 2024 fellows, and today's event is the 3rd in that series for this year. Next, I'm pleased to provide a few words about today's honoree and speaker. Dr. Mary Bechet is an internationally renowned experimental particle physicist celebrated for her outstanding contributions to the intensity frontier of high energy physics. A leader in neutrino research, she has made deep and crucial contributions to our understanding of the nature and behavior of neutrinos, helping to transform how we understand these particles, which are essential for our understanding for how the universe works. Her groundbreaking research includes precise measurements of heavy flavor production at hadron colliders and the disappearance of muon neutrinos. Dr. Bechet has had far-reaching impacts on the United States and international programs that study the characteristics and behavior of neutrinos, an area of scientific investigation that is at the heart of the Office of Science High Energy Physics program. Her work has been supported by the Office of Science throughout her 25-year career at Fermilab and at Brookhaven. Her leadership and technical contributions include work at DOE facilities and on several experiments, the collider detector at Fermilab, the neutrinos at the main injector, or the main injector neutrino oscillation on the NOS experiment, and the long baseline neutrino facility deep underground neutrino experiment, or LBMF-DUNE, which I think many of us are very familiar with because of its importance to high energy physics. Dr. Bechet has been recognized by peers through fellowships, awards, honors, and professional positions. She's a fellow of the American Physical Society, and in January 2023, she was elected by her peers as the co-spokesperson for DUNE, which is a 1,400 member international collaboration. No small challenge. Dr. Bechet has distinguished herself not only as a pioneering physicist, but is also a dedicated mentor, taking meaningful actions to serve the community and future generations of scientists. She has mentored early career researchers, created programs to support their development, and led educational outreach initiatives, including development of a program benefiting underrepresented minority students at Brookhaven National Laboratory in Seward, Old Westbury, and participation in the African School of Physics as a mentor and a guest lecturer. Very impressive. These efforts have made more accessible to underrepresented communities, showcasing her dedication to broadening engagement in physics research. Dr. Bechet clearly represents all the attributes of an Office of Science Distinguished Scientist Fellow: commitment to service, leadership, and commitment to science. We are so pleased to honor her today. Now, it is our pleasure to present the Distinguished Scientist Award to Dr. Mary Bechet for enduring contributions and unraveling fundamental properties of neutrinos, extraordinary leadership and service to the particle physics community, and deep commitment to broadening participation in next generation scientists. I'd like to invite Dr. Gina Onika, Associate Director of the Office of Science for High Energy Physics, come forward to present the award. Dr. Bechet, please join Dr. Onika to receive your award. Everyone, please join me in congratulating Dr. Bechet with a round of applause. We have more than one photo.
Something more down a little bit physically. Right.
Thank you, Gina, and again, congratulations, Mary. Now, everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Mary Shea to the podium for her lecture.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Gina. Thank you for wonderful comments. And welcome everybody to my remarks about how I went around mining for neutrinos over the last 20 years or so. And so I will first start out. Oops. Okay. So I would like to dedicate this lecture to my PhD advisor at Purdue, Professor Ian P.J. Chipsey, who was at Oxford, and he died unexpectedly on the 7th of October in 2024. I'll talk a little bit about myself, and then I'll have to introduce neutrinos and spend some time on that. And then I'll talk about the deep underground neutrino experiment that you've heard quite a bit about, and maybe mention a little bit of the joy I took in mentoring the next generation and introduce you to some of these new scientists that are coming on to do the work that we are spending decades building up for. So I was actually born in Egypt, and I spent pre-K to about 4th grade in Lagos, Nigeria. My parents were both electrical engineers, and they were working in Nigeria at the time. And then we came back to Cairo, and I went middle and high school in Cairo. And what's important about this is that both in Lagos and in Cairo, I had fantastic math and science and physics teachers who nurtured my already love of science. In 1985, I was still 15. I was being mentored, and I had a professor, my uncle, who was a very prominent marine biology professor in Egypt, was actually tutoring me in biology. And he had copies of the National Geographic around. And I told my dad and my mom about this, and they got me a subscription for the National Geographic. And in 1985, there was an article called Worlds Within the Atom. This is the copy of the National Geographic from that year that talked about the science at CERN, the European Laboratory for Particle Physics, and the Tevatron Collider at Fermilab. And so I decided, okay, I wanted to be a scientist. I want to be a particle physicist. And I want to go to either CERN or Fermilab. And so I entered the American University in Cairo, started my undergraduate there, and declared my major to be physics. My mom wanted me to go into computer science or engineering. She's an engineer herself, but I said, I want to be a physicist. And then I came on an exchange program to the University of Colorado Boulder and finished my bachelor's there. I went into a PhD in experimental particle physics at Purdue University, where I studied charm baryons at the CLEO experiment with some people from the Office of High Energy Physics. And then I got a postdoc at the Collider Detector at Fermilab experiment working on the Tevatron. So it was a long journey. It took about 30 years from when I was inspired to when I actually started working on the same Tevatron collider that I had read about in the National Geographic. I became staff. In 2004, I transitioned from working on particle collider physics to working on neutrino projects when I got a staff position at Brookhaven, and I'll tell you why I decided to go into neutrinos. In 2014, I was elected fellow of the American Physical Society, and in 2023, as you've heard, I was elected co-spokesperson of one of the largest neutrino projects in the planet, the Deep Underground Neutrino Experiment, which has 1,400 collaborators from 36 countries and CERN. So a little bit of history of the neutrino, which is Italian for the little neutral one, and we use the Greek letter nu to denote the neutrino. I will first start that neutrinos have not only inspired decades-long research in particle physics, but they also were an inspiration for even some of the great literary minds of the 21st century. So I'll read a few lines from a poem written by John Updike in 1964. Neutrinos, they are very small. They have no charge and have no mass and do not interact at all. The Earth is just a silly ball to them through which they simply pass. So what is this neutrino that has inspired scientists and even great men of letters like John Updike? So you all know that in the early 20th century, the birth of modern physics, people were very active studying radioactive decay. And so one of the things they were looking at were a type of decay that they called a beta decay. And in a beta decay, a nucleus transforms into another nucleus and emits an electron. They measured the energy of the electrons, and through the law of conservation of energy, they expected the energy spectrum to look something like that blue line, to be a single energy that conserves energy, the difference between the energy of the first nucleus and the nucleus it decayed to. What they measured was the red line, which is a continuous distribution of energies. And so they were like, oh my God, energy is not conserved. What is going on? Enter our first Ghostbuster, as I would call him, looking for the ghost neutrino, Wolfgang Pauli, one of the great physicists of the 20th century. And he writes a letter to physicists at a workshop in Tübingen. The German version is on the right. On the left is a translation, but basically it says that, maybe instead of the beta radiation, there's also another particle being emitted, a neutral particle of mass much smaller than that of the proton, and it is invisible and it carries away some of the energy, and the sum of the energies of that and the electron being emitted in beta decay, they will add up to that single energy that we expected. And then he wrote, I'm sorry, I can't come to Tübingen to tell you about my great idea because I'm partying for the next 2 nights. So yeah, physicists do party quite a bit. So to continue this story, I need to introduce some symbols and some concepts. So you'll see these symbols used throughout my talk. We use the letter nu to detonate a neutrino. Since it's a neutral particle, if I put a bar on that nu, that means it's an antiparticle. Every particle has an antiparticle. A photon is gamma, the Greek letter gamma. An electron is an E with a minus because it's a negative charge. An anti-electron is E with a plus sign because it's positively charged. A proton is a small p, a neutron is a small n. And if I use a big N or the word nucleon, I mean it could be either a proton or neutron interchangeably. Now, particle physicists express mass in terms of energy. There's Einstein, it's E equals mc squared. Mass is just a form of energy. And so our yardstick and the unit we use is an electron volt. An electron traveling in your AA battery from one terminal to the other, 1.5 volts, has an energy of 1.5 electron volts. The mass of a proton is 1 billion electron volts. Now that may sound like a very large number, but somewhere in the internet, somebody wrote down that 1,000 giga electron volts, which is the 1 billion electron volts, is the energy of a flying mosquito. Now, I don't know how biologists can measure the energy of a flying mosquito, or even if that number is right, but I put it up there just to tell you, just because we talk about high energy physics and billion of electron volts on the human scale, this is a very small amount of energy. So there's the neutrino. It's being proposed by Dr. Pauli. And so now the story continues in how to actually detect these neutrinos. How do we trap these ghost particles? And so a few concepts I need to introduce is that in particle physics, we have different types of particles. There are 2 families of elementary particles, the quarks, and there are 6 of them, and you've heard about those. We're made out of up and down quarks and a lot of gluons. I'll not talk about gluons. The leptons is a group of elementary particles, and it contains the electron and the proposed neutrino. Baryons are composite particles containing quarks, like protons and neutrons, and the electron-ion collider is there to tell us what other things is made out of and in the proton and the neutron. That's another huge project here in the Office of Science. Mesons are composite particles containing quark-antiquark pairs, like the pi meson. Now, we assign a number to baryons, like protons or neutrons. They get a number 1, B equals 1. We also assign a baryon number to their antiparticles, which is -1. We have lepton numbers that each lepton, like an electron, would get 1, an anti-electron would get -1, a neutrino would get a lepton number of 1, anti-neutrino would get number 1. Why do I introduce baryons and lepton numbers? These are conserved, meaning that if I start out with a baryon, something with a baryon number 1, I should end up with baryon number 1. And these laws of conservation, like charge, baryon, lepton number, energy, are all due to underlying symmetries in nature. And we as particle physicists we're trying to find out this observational conservation laws and translate them into actual what's underlying symmetry they denote. We don't know. I'm an experimentalist. It's up to the theorists to figure that part out. So we now know that beta decay is a neutron that decays to a proton, an electron, and an antineutrino. Now, if I put our baryon numbers up here, I start out with baryon number 1, I end up with baryon number 1. The electron has lepton number 1, the antineutrino has lepton number 1. They cancel out, baryon number is conserved. That means that this interaction also happened. A neutrino interacting with a neutron would give you a proton and an electron. And if I put up my baryon and lepton numbers, they all match up. 1, 1, 1, 1. So if I then ask you, what do you think this interaction will produce? A proton interacting with an antineutrino. And I'll pause for a little bit. You can think about it. And if you've guessed that what I would end up with is a neutron and an anti-electron or a positron, then you would have guessed right. This is the process we call the inverse beta decay. And it is the process that our first set of Ghostbusters and Fred Reines and Clyde Cohen used to actually discover the neutrino. They called this the Poltergeist Project. And so they set out to discover the neutrino using the interaction of a proton, which produces a neutron and a positron. And to do that, they filled the detector. They had to find a huge source of neutrinos. And so they said, oh, well, you know, it's the 1950s. There's a lot of atomic bomb tests. Maybe we'll put a detector there and detect the neutrinos from the fission in the bomb. But that wasn't very practical. So they ended up going to the Hanford nuclear reactor and later the Savannah River reactor. They filled the detector with water with cadmium chloride and located it 11 meters from the reactor center, 12 meters underground. So it's shielded a little bit from the radiation that we get from cosmic rays. And the detection sequence was as follows. An electron neutrino interacts with a proton, produces a neutron, a positron. Positron is antimatter. It annihilates and gives a flash of light. The detector was surrounded by light detectors. So this tank with fluid in it had light detectors, and you can see them sticking out with wires. And so it detected that initial flash of light. The reason they used cadmium chloride in that solution was the neutron then captures on cadmium, and that becomes the same material, but with more neutrons in the nucleus, which then is an excited state. It just got a neutron jammed into it with a little bit more energy. So it de-excites and emits another photon, and that takes about 5 microseconds for that capture to happen. So they had 2 flashes of light separated by 5 millionths of a second. And by counting the number of these flashes, turn on the reactor, turn off the reactor, they actually observed the neutrinos because these double bang of light only happened when the reactors were on. It happened a lot more. It took a while for people to believe that they had actually seen neutrinos, but eventually Reines shared the 1995 Nobel for the detection of the neutrino. And just as a fun fact, a gigawatt commercial reactor, current commercial nuclear reactors produce tens of gigawatts, will produce 10 to the 20, that's 1 with 20 zeros, of anti-electron neutrinos per second. So Reines and Cohen were the first to estimate the interaction strengths of neutrinos. They measure a quantity that we in particle physics call a cross-section. The cross-section has units of area, and the number they measured is 10 to the minus 43 centimeters squared per nucleon. Now, you don't have to worry about what that means, but it means that we can take this number and calculate how far a neutrino would travel before it actually interacts. So here's the formula. The mean free path is 1 over the cross-section times the number of nucleons. I work it all out over here, and it turns out that that number in lead, for example, which would correspond to 1.5 times 10 to the 16 meters. That's 1.6 light years of lead, or 100,000 times distance of the Earth to the Sun. In comparison, a proton has a mean free path of 10 centimeters in lead. So to be able to detect neutrinos and study them, we need to have a larger number of sources. At the same time, in the early 20th century, particle discoveries were coming fast and furious. So in 1936, Carl Anderson and his graduate student were studying cosmic rays, and you can see a picture of the charged particle tracks they were seeing in their detectors. And what they were seeing over there, these long tracks, they discovered that they came about from a particle which was very much like the electron, but had 200 times the mass. So they had discovered another lepton called, and they called it the muon. So now we have the electron, the muon. We had in these electron neutrinos that were emitted in beta decays. And so the question then happened, are there different flavors of neutrinos the way there are different flavors of leptons? And in 1962, three gentlemen, Leon Lederman, Mel Schwartz, and Jack Steinberger, another group of Ghostbusters, used a proton beam from Brookhaven's alternative gradient synchrotron, at the time one of the more powerful proton accelerators in the world. They slammed it into a target, and out of that target, they break up the nucleus. Pi mesons emerge, made out of quark, anti-quark matter. And it turns out that the pi mesons, they decay into a muon and a neutrino. And the question these gentlemen had is this the same neutrino as that one emitted in beta decay? It's the same underlying physics process. So they surrounded a detector in steel shielding, and they turned the proton beam on, proton pulse, and they look at the signatures in their detector. And this is Mel Schwartz in front of the detector, and you see these long tracks. Those are the muons again. And here's a picture of an invisible neutrino coming in, interacting, and producing a long track, the signature of a muon. This neutrino was emitted with a muon, and it interacts, it produces a muon. They recorded 40 neutrino interactions. The vast majority of them, 34, produced these long tracks called a muon. And so now we understand that the neutrinos have two different types or two different flavors. One favors an electron, one favors muons. One's an electron neutrino, one is a muon neutrino. And for this work, they got the 1988 Nobel Prize. So, God, how many of these neutrinos are there? How many particles are there? This is a seminal result in particle physics, came in the 80s and 90s, when we actually estimated the exact number of neutrino flavors. And this came from studies of something called the Z boson. So at CERN in Switzerland, in a ring 27 kilometer in circumference, they were colliding electrons and anti-electrons at high energies. And they look at the probability of interaction as a function of energy, which is the plot that you see on the right. And you see that probability of the interaction, it's enhanced, that's the cross section sigma, and then it comes back down again. And exactly at that peak is where a particle is produced. And this particle has a mass of 90 giga electron volts, 90 times the proton mass. The width of that interaction is directly proportional to the number of different types of particle that Z boson decay to. It decays to neutron, anti-neutrino, it decays to quark, anti-quark, or electron, anti-electron, or neutrino, anti-neutrino. In the circles in there is the data. The three different lines, the solid line and the dashed lines correspond to different predictions of how that shape would look like, depending on the number of neutrinos. And you can see that the line for three types of neutrinos goes exactly through the data. So we've exactly determined the number of neutrinos. Eventually, the tau lepton was discovered, and a much heavier than the electron or the muon, and a neutrino called the tau neutrino was also discovered in the early 12th century. This is what we look like now in the standard model of particle physics. We have the quark family with the 6 quarks. We have the lepton family with 3 charged leptons, the electron, the muon, the tau, and the electron neutrino, the muon neutrino, and the tau neutrino. We also have the Higgs particle that many of you may have heard about. And it turns out that we know from beta decay, the study of the beta decay spectrum, that neutrinos are no more than an electron volt. That is 1 billion times lighter than a proton. So, and much, much lighter even than an electron. And so the Higgs particle, which gives mass to the quarks and gives mass to the charged leptons, the electrons, the muons, and the taus, does not directly couple to the neutrinos, because otherwise they would be much more massive than what we know they are now, being so light. So for a long time, we thought that neutrinos did not have any mass because they did not fit in our model with a Higgs boson giving mass to particles. They thought they would be massless like a photon. Now people ask, now you've discovered the neutrinos, are they, one of the questions always comes up, are they dark matter? This is actual, the the distribution of different matter and energy in our universe, 70% is what we call dark energy, and actually the neutrinos, unfortunately, will only have 1%. So they're not the dark matter. I want to get that out of the way. But they are the second most abundant particle, known particle in our universe. Dark matter, of course, is 25%, and we don't know what that is. Neutrinos are everywhere. To continue studying them, we want large sources of neutrinos. We know we can get them from reactors or very powerful proton accelerators, but they're actually everywhere. Everywhere from 300 neutrinos on the tip of your thumb or from leftover from the Big Bang. The sun produces 10 billion neutrinos going through the tip of your thumb. When a star implodes, it will produce neutrinos. The cosmic rays interacting in the atmosphere produce neutrinos. And the highest energy neutrinos come from the particle accelerators around black holes at the center of galaxies. And when I was asked which is the most fascinating experiment you think running today, I should say, deep underground neutrino experiment. I've been working on it for 20 years. I find the two experiments that are running, and this is a list of all the experiments running, studying neutrinos from all these different sources. The one trying to find the Big Bang, and the one that are looking for the highest energy ones. That's the one, that's the IceCube experiment, which is a kilometer cubed of ice instrumented in the South Pole. Look it up. It's a fascinating experiment. And the one looking for neutrinos from the Big Bang, that's a crazy one. We can talk about that later, but look it up. Continuing our story of neutrinos, our next Ghostbuster was Ray Davis, and he set out to try and look for neutrinos from the sun. Now, what we have on the top right figure is all the different types of fusion reactions that happen in the sun. Protons fuse to produce helium, and then we have helium fusing with the hydrogen, and then we can have things like carbon and nitrogen, oxygen, all produced in the fusion processes. And you'll see in this diagram that neutrinos are emitted in many of these reactions. We know the energy coming from the sun. The other thing emitted is, of course, photons. That's what we see. And so we had a pretty good model in the 1960s of how many neutrinos we could expect from the sun. So Ray Davis, he's a chemist and a physicist, installed a large detector with 615 tons of cleaning fluid, which contained chlorine, a mile underground in the Homestead Gold Mine, an operational gold mine at the time in South Dakota. And he used a chemical process, so the electron neutrinos from the sun would interact with chlorine, and they would create an isotope of argon with atomic number 37. The argon that is 1% of our air is argon 40, not argon 37. Nothing else is going to produce argon 37 unless it's that neutrino interaction. And then he took samples and counted individual atoms of argon 37. He did that over a period of almost 20 years. And he not only was able to extract argon 37 and count it, he also discovered that there's a deficit of about 70% from what he expected. In 2002, Ray Davis was awarded a Nobel Prize for pioneering contribution to astrophysics, particularly for the detection of the cosmic neutrinos from the sun. But what happened to Ray Davis's neutrinos? I have to introduce some quantum mechanics here. So it was the PhD thesis of Louis de Broglie in 1924 that told us about some of the most fascinating things about quantum mechanics, which is the wave-particle duality. And he said relativistic particles can either propagate as waves and interact as particles. This is the wave-particle duality. And he gave a formula for calculating the wavelength. But that's the concept, the key concept of quantum mechanics is that particles can be both waves and particles at the same time. And so then in the 1950s, around the time when we were thinking about neutrinos having multiple flavors, Bruno Pontecorvo proposed that maybe if neutrinos have multiple flavors, they're also a mix of quantum states with different masses. They would propagate as waves, and if they have different masses, well, they propagate with different speeds, and so the mix of the masses would change. And so what you could have is one flavor of neutrino turning into another flavor of neutrino, but that's only if they're made of different mass states that interfere. And this is the undergraduate level quantum mechanics. I'm not going to go through that formula. Just, I'm a physicist, have to show something like this up. Otherwise, that's my bona fides. But the key thing here is that the probability that a neutrino flavor A oscillates to flavor B is given by probability amplitude that we physicists parameterized as an angle theta. And the amplitude is the square of the sine of 2 times that angle theta. We call that the mixing angle. And a sinusoidal function that goes as the difference in the masses times the distance traveled divided by the energy. So if we observe a neutrino of a particular flavor disappear and regenerate, disappear and regenerate, we would be able to predict if it's made out of the mass differences of the different mass states, assuming that this model is right. And guess what? That is exactly what they found out. So we move to Japan. And so the Super Kamiokande detector sits in a Kamioka mine in the mountains of Japan. And it studies neutrinos produced from cosmic rays. And it can identify the type of neutrino, whether it's muon or electron. It can identify the direction of the neutrino, so it can see neutrinos coming from above and neutrinos produced in the atmosphere coming from below. And so the neutrinos that travel the longest distances, and this is on the left is the data divided the predicted data over the prediction. And so the neutrinos that travel the shortest distances, that says from above or from nearby, they match the prediction pretty well. The neutrinos that travel the longest distances, the x-axis is the distance divided by the energy. There's a huge deficit. Not only that, if you look at the red line, you can start to see a little bit of a sinusoidal behavior. This was the discovery of neutrino oscillations. We can just look at that graph. You can pull up the difference masses that little sinusoidal wiggle corresponds to, and it's 2.5 times 10 to the minus 3 electron volt square, or about 50 milli electron volts. The scale of the wiggle is about 500 kilometers per giga electron volt. Right next to that mine is another neutrino detector, very similar to Ryan's and Cohen's. It turns out that there's a whole bunch of nuclear reactors located about 180 kilometers. And it also looked at the disappearance of electron antineutrinos from all these reactors in Japan. And it plotted that data as a function of the distance divided by the energy. And you see another beautiful sinusoidal wiggle. And if we read off the distance over energy scale, it's about 15 kilometers per mega electron volts, or 15,000 kilometers per giga electron volts. Now look at these two numbers. That means the mass difference that they measure in Camland right next to Super K is very different. It's almost 2 orders of magnitude smaller. So we have 2 different masses, mass differences. Translation, we probably have to have at least 3 neutrino masses if I'm going to have 2 different differences. That plot on the right is why I decided to go into neutrino physics. There's a presentation at the time I was stuck at Fermilab, studying B quark production at the Tevatron accelerator. I went to that presentation by Camland. I said, oh my God, this is wave particle duality. It's quantum mechanics and it's just there, It's like, okay, that's cool. That's what I want to do. Applied a lot of jobs and I landed the job working on the Minos experiment and the long baseline neutrino experiment at BNL. And there I became a neutrino physicist. 2015 Nobel Prize was awarded to Takaaki Kijita and Art McDonald, who also proved that solar neutrinos oscillate using a solar neutrino detector similar to Ray Davis's, but located in a nickel mine in Canada. And so atmospheric neutrino oscillations and solar neutrinos oscillations, and they shared a 2015 Nobel Prize for that. There's even more. My first involvement with neutrino oscillations was with the Diabei experiment, which was a joint US-China reactor neutrino experiment located near the Diabei nuclear reactor complex in right outside the suburbs of Shenzhen, close to Hong Kong. So the complex produces 17.4 gigawatts from 6 cores. That around the time we started this experiment more than a decade ago, this was probably one of the most powerful reactors in the world. The experiment involved 231 collaborators from 6 countries and 41 institutions, 17 institutions from the US. We started taking data in 2011. We've been collecting data. We put a set of neutrino detectors close to the cores, a few hundred meters away, and then another set about 1 kilometer away from the cores. And we studied the neutrino close by and the neutrino spectrum from the near and far detectors, and we compared. The last result just came out a few weeks ago using 500 million in neutrino interactions. You can see the spectrum of neutrinos from uranium-235 and plutonium-239, measured with percent level precision. So we looked at the spectrum in the near detectors, and then we looked at the spectrum from the far detectors, and we saw another wiggle. That wiggle had an amplitude of only about 10%. Okay, so the other oscillations had huge amplitudes. The mass difference it corresponded to is the same as that of the atmospheric detectors. And this was the last amplitude that we measured for neutrino oscillations. We have 3 amplitudes now and 3 masses. So we measured 10% with sub% precision. It's an extremely difficult project to do, but we're very proud of the result. This result came out in 2012, the same year the Higgs result came out. And as far as particle physicists were concerned, these 2 results were of equal importance, and this will come back, and I'll explain why. So this is the picture we have. What I have over here are, oh, something happened to the picture in this slide. My apologies. Okay, what we have now are 3 mass states, each contain different amounts of electron neutrino, muon neutrino, and tau neutrinos. And the bars there should have just 3 colors. Apparently, there's some of the boxes came into the foreground. My apologies, PowerPoint, lovely. But essentially, the first mass state has the most amount of electron neutrino. The second mass state has almost equal amounts of all 3 types of flavored neutrinos. The third mass state is almost all muon neutrino and tau neutrino. And that diabase measurement gives us a tiny bit of electron neutrino there. We know the mass differences. We know that the second mass state is heavier than the first mass state, but we don't know whether the third mass state is heavier than the first one, the one with the most electron neutrino in it, or whether that's inverted compared to the masses of the electron and the muons, with the electron being lighter, and whether we have the third mass state being the lightest. So this is another symmetry that we're trying to find out, whether it goes 1, 2, 3, or it goes 3, 3, 1, 2. Now, because we have 3 quantum state interfering, there's a phase, delta. Just keep that in mind. We have, these are waves, they're traveling, there's 3 of them. There will be a phase. Why is that phase important? And I introduce here a key symmetry, again, an observational symmetry in physics, which is charge parity. And charge parity symmetry basically says the laws of physics are the same if a particle is interchanged with its antiparticle and left and right are swapped. An example of that is what you see over here, which is a picture of a photon, which is a bit invisible. It comes into a detector, a charged particle detector, and it converts into a track that curls around, that's an electron, and another track that curls around in the opposite direction, that is an anti-electron or a positron. That's the symmetry we are talking about. A violation of this symmetry would give you either more matter or antimatter in the universe. And we know that our universe is made out of matter. And this is where we move on to the next phase in our story of neutrinos. Now, in 1964, in an experiment at Brookhaven, we have mixing in the quarks like we do in the neutrinos. Val Cronin and James Fitch discovered that charge parity is violated. They're in the mixing of quarks and the neutral K mesons. And they got a Nobel Prize in 1980 for the discovery of this violation of a fundamental symmetry principle, in this the case of neutral K mesons. So we're done. We've explained the matter-antimatter symmetry in the universe. It has to do with the, the charge parity violation in the quark sector, blah, blah, blah. Not so fast. It turns out that the amount of charge parity violation is a number that we see here. We see all these so-called mixing angles, which have to do with the different mixes of flavors in the state you're looking at, multiplied by sine this number delta. All of these numbers have been measured in the quark sector, and we came up with a number which is 3 times 10 to the minus 5. It is because the mixing is so small. Delta is actually almost 70 degrees in quark sector, but the mixings are so small that this number came out really tiny. And that tells us that the actual amount of charge parity violation is pretty small, and it's too small to explain the preponderance of a matter over antimatter in the universe. Now, we also have neutrinos, and they also mix. So immediately the question is, well, the mixings are so large in the neutrinos, maybe they have a very large number. This Yarskog invariant may be pretty big, but we're missing one piece. We don't know what this delta is. Now, so to find out what this delta is, first I need to make neutrinos, I need to make antineutrinos, I need to look how they oscillate. And so that's where the experiment I first joined as a neutrino experimentalist was the MINOS experiment. And it uses a beam from Fermilab. So we have a 120 GeV proton beam, hits a target, it produces almost equal amounts of pi mesons, which are negatively charged, and anti-pi mesons, which are positively charged. But we put 2 focusing magnets right after the target, and then we can focus or defocus either pi minus or pi plus. If we focus the pi plus, and we send them into a very long pipe where they decay, they produce anti-muon neutrinos. If we focus the pi minus, they produce muon neutrinos. So the pi minus produces anti-muon neutrinos, and the pi plus produces anti-muon neutrinos. Sorry. And so that's how we do it. So what we see over here is in neutrino mode, we are focusing the positive pions, and they produce a spectrum of muon neutrinos. It's almost purely muon neutrinos. In the anti-neutrino mode, we focus anti-pi minuses, which actually produce anti-muon neutrinos. And at least in the region up to 5 gigaelectron volts, that red curve, it's almost a pure beam of anti-muon neutrinos. Now, we did actually in the MINOS experiment with 2 detectors at 1 kilometer and another big detector, a few kilotons, underground in the Soudan mine in Minnesota. We looked at the disappearance of the oscillation of muon neutrinos and muon antineutrinos, and we measured some of the parameters, and they looked the same. So does that mean that there's no CP violation? It turns out that just looking at the oscillation of muon neutrinos is not very sensitive to the value of this delta CP parameter. What we really need to do is look at muon neutrinos that oscillate into electron neutrinos. And to do that, if we look at energy versus baseline, and those colored curves are the probability, where it's darker, the probability is higher. The longer distance you travel, that baseline is the distance the neutrino travels, the more wiggles you see. So it turns out that the former Homestake mine, now the Sanford Underground Research Facility, is located 1,300 kilometers from Fermilab, which produced the most powerful neutrino beam in the world, the NUMI beam. And so if we go over there, we can see that we can see a lot of wiggles, and those wiggles change quite a bit if we vary the value of delta. So we do that for neutrinos on top, antineutrinos on the bottom, and you can see that the shape and the amplitudes of the oscillations are very different for neutrinos and antineutrinos, depending on the value of delta. And if the mass ordering is inverted, it also changes that. So you can go back and forth, and you can see that not only will I be able to tell the mass ordering, but I can also tell the value of delta by studying these oscillations of muon neutrinos to electron neutrinos. Which brings us to the deep underground neutrino experiment at the Long Baseline facility. This is the ultimate neutrino experiment. We have a very long baseline. We have a very powerful beam of neutrinos from Fermilab. We have several detectors located near the beam source and very deep, a mile underground at the far side. Our scientific objectives are to measure the oscillations of neutrinos in all the parameters, to search for physics beyond the 3 flavors of neutrinos using these oscillations and the spectrometer. We're also going to look for proton decay, which is baryon number non-conservation. And we also want to be ready to be able to see the neutrinos produced from a supernova explosion. And using this high intensity beam of neutrinos at the near site, we can actually look for dark matter produced in the proton target. To start such a big effort, and this is a multi-billion-dollar, took many years. When I joined Brookhaven Lab in 2004, it started with a group of scientists, Milan Diwan, Bill Marciano, and Bill Wang, an experimentalist, a theorist, and accelerator physicist. They coordinated a small group of people. They produced a proposal to send a neutrino beam from Brookhaven Lab to what was then the Homestake Mine. By 2007, we had joined with Gina Remika and Fermilab and 27 other institutions, and it had become, and we did a study and determined that going from Fermilab to Homestake Mine would give us the most bang for our buck. By 2014, we were already a very large collaboration with 500 members. And in 2015, we combined this international effort based in the US with an international effort to do the same experiment in Europe. And we became the Deep Underground Neutrino Experiment with 1,400 people, 36 countries, including CERN, and 209 institutions. There were about half US and half non-US. And I was elected along with my colleague, who was the former CERN science director, Sergio Bertolucci, as co-spokesperson of this collaboration. The composition is about half faculty, 17% postdocs, 24% grad students, a lot of engineering and computing people. We have to employ a lot of advanced technologies. The beamline is challenging, the focusing, the shielding, the target materials, but we produce a beamline that covers several, at least 2 maxima and 1 minima in the oscillation pattern. The detectors use liquid argon. The temperature of liquid argon is -300 Fahrenheit, -186 centigrade. The neutrino comes in, it interacts, it produces the tracks that you've seen. They drift in an electrical field, and we have sense planes. And what you see on the right is a photograph of one of these sense planes. We will have 150 of those in one of 4 detectors. And so you can, with a person to scale. This is very international. We currently have 2 detectors planned, each about 17 kilotons of liquid argon. And you can see the different countries contributing to the detectors. And about half of the detectors will be from outside the US, half the components are from the US. CERN is contributing the 2 cryostat to house these detectors. And each cryostat, we'll have 4 of them, is the size of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. To give you a size of the scale, we built 5% prototypes and located them in a charged particle beam at CERN. This is an image of the interaction of a 7 gigaelectron volt pion. On the top right is a charged sense plane. We are going to have, of each of these, there are 4 squares there. We're going to have 75 on the top and 75 on the bottom in the actual detector, and there's a person to scale. And so we've been running these at CERN. On the top is a simulated muon neutrino would look like in our detector. And then on the right is a simulated electron neutrino interaction. On the bottom is actual data from a charged pion interaction and a high energy neutrino. We have the same thing going on in the near detector. We have multiple detectors at the site with multiple technologies. I will focus on a major result achievement we had last year when a prototype of the liquid argon detector that we're putting close to the beam at Fermilab recorded neutrino beams from the NUMMI beamline. And these are some of the interactions from the beam. We're going to see oscillations of muon neutrinos. We're going to see, this is the expected spectrum of electron neutrinos. Very clean spectrum, very little background. We'll study that in detail. And close to my heart is also the fact that if a supernova happens, we can look at the neutrino as a signal, as a function of time, and maybe even see the core collapsing. DUNE is the only experiment that is sensitive to electron neutrinos. The other experiments will only see the anti-electron neutrinos. And this is the comparison in the bottom. Okay. We had in August 15, the excavation of the 2 huge caverns was done. There was a ribbon cutting ceremony. Several people in this room was there. Yay! We are now starting to construct the cryostats, and we expect the first car detector of 4 will turn on in 2029. Beam and near detectors ready by 2031, and the near detector by 2032. Which is the last part of my talk, is about the mentoring of the next generation, which is one of the highlights of my career. We have a large, diverse group of mentors. So I picked an example of the different students that we mentor, and this is a group effort, it's not just me. So I will start with my high school student from last year, Lisa Remetsa. She was mentored by myself and primarily by Nitish Nayak, our postdoc, and she won a Regeneron Society for Science Award for determining the DUNE convolutional neural network neutrino identification biases. She used machine learning and tried to find out how, when identifying neutrino interactions, how well an artificial intelligence would do. There's a picture of me with high school students from the African School in Physics. We have mechanical engineering interns. We have interns in electrical engineering. We even had an intern who was doing some science writing working with our group. And last, I want to call out to the African School of Fundamental Physics and its applications. Ketevia Samagan from Brookhaven is the co-founder. This is a biennial school every 2 years, happens in different countries around the African continent. The last one was in Morocco last year. And we also now started a program in 2019 funded of Office of High Energy Physics, where we bring in the interns to Brookhaven Lab. And they work in different things, not just particle physics. We've had some biophysics interns coming in. We've had them work with the light source, and we've had them work with Kathy Cutler in the isotope program, and also with our computational people. And that's the end. So some final remarks and acknowledgements. Working in experimental particle physics has given me, at the national labs and DOE national labs especially, given me an incredible opportunity to study fundamental science of the universe and to study the worlds within the atom that I started 40 years ago with. Mentorship and the opportunity to mentor has allowed me to grow as a person. I want to thank, of course, my parents and my sister, and special thanks to Milan, D1, the first spokesperson at LBNE, my mentor, Steve Kittel, Laurie Littenberg at Fermilab, Ting Miao, Slavomir Chasik, and of course, the DOE. Thank you.
So first of all, I'd like to say thank you. That was really interesting and I learned a lot. I think many people in this room at least know I'm the acting associate director for nuclear physics, but I am not a nuclear physicist. So seeing some of you really helped expand my understanding of the field.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful. And again, congratulations on your receiving this award and this great presentation. So now we have an opportunity for questions. So we'll start in the room here and then move to questions online. Brian Beckford from High Energy Physics is here and is monitoring the online Q&A. So if you have questions, put them in and then he will read them out at the appropriate time. So, first question.
So I'm also a particle physicist, so forgive me if the question is trivial. But I'm expecting to understand what DUNE will provide in terms of falsifying hypotheses that are going to advance the physics beyond standard model, supersymmetry theory, or some hypothesis. So how can you connect what measure can you do, or with different DUNE, which is fully functional, with the physics that you are going to validate or falsify that has been proposed in the literature?
So the CP violation and seeing CP violation is a large driver of it. It's not, so there are a lot of symmetries we're exploring in nature and violation of symmetries. And CP symmetry is the particular one that Dune is targeting. But we can also look for some of the program we have is using the very high intensity proton beams in our NEO detectors. We're also starting to look for maybe dark matter produced in the target, some maybe not supersymmetric particles, we're not at that energy level, but heavy neutral leptons that are predicted when we try to shoehorn a neutrino into the standard model and give it mass. There's some of this new physics will also be explored using the facilities, particularly closer to the source, the high intensity proton source. A lot of the searches for supersymmetries, though, are better done at the big colliders like CERN. And so that's the physics that's done there. There are many symmetries in nature, but the biggest one of them that we are targeting is the CP symmetry. We're also going to be looking at using the neutrino Dune as an interferometer to look for new interactions, right? We have the 4 interactions, gravity, the electromagnetic interaction, weak and strong. We're trying to use neutrinos because it's a neutral probe. It's much more sensitive to new interactions that are weaker than the weak force, and try and use that beautiful interferometry that we have as the neutrinos travel through the Earth. Maybe probe whether there's even beyond the standard model physics in new types of interactions. There's no theoretical motivation for it. It's just we're building this facility to push on some of these areas, and only that we can do with the neutrino oscillations. Other questions?
Well, did you tell us whether neutrinos are Majorana or direct fermions?
No. That is, but Dune tells us a very important piece of information. Dune will definitively measure the mass ordering. And if the mass ordering is inverted, then the currently planned double beta decay experiments will be able to measure the neutrino mass. If it's not inverted, which is where a lot of the hints are, and that within the first year of turning the beam on, we will tell what it is. And so it is important because it tells us how far we can keep pushing on the double beta decay experiments. And these, for Office of Nuclear Physics, are several $100 million experiments. And so you want to know, whether if you know it's inverted, go. We'll measure the neutrino mass there. That tells us about the Majorana. In terms of the neutrino mass, that's the Catherine experiment, which looks at the tritium beta decay to be able to figure the absolute mass. But in terms of whether it's neutrinos, its own antiparticle, we just need to know the hierarchy. That gives us a very good idea what experiments that we need to keep building.
So what will be, you mentioned, I think, 4 neutrino related Nobel Prizes.
Yes.
Which one will be next?
I don't know if the world is tired of neutrino Nobel Prizes, or whether actually discovering CP violation at a large enough scale is worth it. At this point, I think we've exhausted a lot of that. So I don't know if there is another Nobel Prize left in neutrino. I hope so, but who knows? I think I may be too tired of that.
Thank you. Okay, any questions online, Brian?
Yeah, we actually have a few. I'll start off with this one. You mentioned Dune is the ultimate neutrino experiment. Will there remain more neutrino-related mysteries after Dune? And will there be a need for bigger neutrino experiments after Dune, since it is the ultimate neutrino experiment?
It is the ultimate neutrino experiment for oscillations. Okay, so we have a set of these very large experiments. So the one question that may remain is this question of so-called unitarity. If a muon neutrino oscillates to tau neutrinos and electron neutrinos, does it all add up to 1? Or is there new physics? So we are hoping that in the later phases of Dune, we can actually also look at muon neutrino oscillating to tau neutrino. and also use the atmospheric neutrino experiments to, that is the next big question. So we could get a head on with DUNE, with with our competitors in Japan, T2 Hyper K, our not our competitors, our partners in Japan in neutrino physics, T2 Hyper K, on really, and with the IceCube experiment as well, these large massive neutrino experiments could get a head up on the unitarity question, which is, do the probabilities add up to 1? Because if they don't, this is again a broken symmetry, an indication of even more physics that we couldn't think of. And so I think DUNE will get us part of the way there. The combination of all of these experiments will really constrain the so-called unitarity problem, but I'm not quite sure. We might need to push beyond that. But right now, we don't have really good ideas for experiments to push beyond what we have today.
Or questions online? Probably take one more.
There are, this is a, let's see, this is a two-part, and how does anti-muon neutrinos produced in high energy astrophysical processes differ from those produced in terrestrial sources?
So the biggest source of anti-muon neutrinos that we study is from cosmic rays, and they're pretty much, it's the same process, right? It's just that cosmic processes, well, the accelerators around black holes are at energies way beyond anything we see. So the other subtlety with neutrinos is that the density of neutrinos produced in, say, a supernova collapsing star can actually impact neutrino oscillation. So these are areas where there are things happening that we cannot reproduce on Earth. But a large part of it is just that we can't build an accelerator like the one around a black hole. So.
More questions?
No, that you said it was two-part. That was
one part of it. Why is the cross-section for anti-muon neutrino interactions generally lower than that of muon neutrinos?
Why is the cross-section of anti-muon neutrinos lower? I think it's because they interact with matter. So it's just basically anti-muons. If I had an anti-hydrogen, then it probably would have the same cross-section. But all neutrino interactions are on matter because that's what we have in the universe. And so those cross-sections, when you have antimatter interactions, we're made out of matter, and that favors interacting. It's more likely to interact with an electron neutrino, say, or a muon neutrino than it is to interact with an anti-muon neutrino.
So I have one final question. One of the things that I've discovered since being in the nuclear physics is the challenge of communication. So as you look at particle physics and neutrino experiments, how do you explain that to the general public and their impact on society?
So I think that I'll tell an example. In the LRD days, we had a meeting where we got together at Asilomar, which is on the Pacific coast, which is unfortunately birdy right now. And I wandered into, this was like a retreat. And there were a couple of people from, I think it was from Indiana there. And I wandered in and they're asking what we're doing. And I started to explain to them about how we're getting scientists from all over the world to study the basic science of the universe. And that's the thing that fascinated people the most. In times where we are so divided in so many ways, the fact that these experiments bring together scientists, engineers, computational physicists, technicians, to build something to explain the mysteries of our universe, whether we're looking at pictures from James Webb or whether we're trying to understand the neutrinos telling us about a core collapse supernova, and getting all together in this pursuit. I think most people really love that idea. This is something that we can all be fascinated by, and it brings us all together to answer that question. these experiments, the experiments at CERN, for example, are some of the most complex machines built by human beings. And this experience and embedding young people in that experience of so many different scientific disciplines, everything from material science to electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and physics together is incredible, because it's an experience you're not going to get in very easily in other areas of this. Yes, it costs a lot of money to do these experiments, but being able to bring all those people together to do it in all those disciplines is unique to particle physics. And I think a lot of people also are fascinated by that.
Yes, I can appreciate that a lot. Thank you. It is time to bring today's events to a close. It's been a great discussion. Really, really interesting. So before we conclude, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, both here in the room in person and online. So thank you all very much. And I would also like to thank all the people involved in organizing today's event, because these things don't happen quickly, including the staff from High Energy Physics, the staff from my office, from the Deputy Director for Science Programs Office, and from the Communications Office here at the Department of Energy. So this has been a great team. Gary, it's been a wonderful opportunity for us to listen to you and learn from you, and it was really fantastic. So please, let's give Mary